And how you doing, brother?
I'm doing great, John. It's great to be with you, man. I really appreciate you having me on.
Anytime. I want to have you on more often. Ever since you had me on the Oddcast, I would say about 3 weeks ago, a month ago, somewhere around there.
Yeah. Yeah, about a
Um,
month, yeah.
we discussed about the Council for National Policy and everything, and it was good to talk with someone who is a fellow brother in Christ, because there's not too many of us out there in the conspiracy
Absolutely.
movement. So, it's something.
Yeah.
But so yeah, so I guess this evening I wanted to bring you on in your research about a little known group that is part of the I don't know, for lack of better words, I guess Anglo-American establishment, even though they're primarily Anglo in Britain. Because most people that talk about the world order, they talk about the powerful Zionist factions or the Freemasons or the Jesuits. Um, or the Swiss, and I'm not going to say that, you know, those groups of the higher echelons are not important. However,
Right.
most people, at least nowadays, in the truth or industrial complex, generally do not discuss the Anglo-American establishment side of things. Which you can argue the CMP, CFR, Trilateral Commission, the Bilderberg Group is kind of like a representation of that to some degree. But the Pilgrims Society is one that is relatively not talked about, even by people who discuss the City of London, the Anglo-American establishment, the royal, family of
hmm
Britain. Um, and I've always wondered why that is. Why do you think so, Odd Man? Any idea of why that may be?
Well, to be honest, I never gave much credence to the whole idea that, you know as well as I do, ever since we got into this kind of conspiracy alternate media community, there's that conspiracy that the Brits control the United States. And I never gave much credence to it because, the Brits seem, I mean, and I'm not putting anyone who's a British citizen. I have no problem with them whatsoever, of course. But the Brits, as a whole, they seem kind of weak, and in the Parliament they get up there, and it's just it's a madhouse, and it's kind of entertaining. But I never really took that seriously, and I got this book about a year and a half ago, and they briefly mentioned the Pilgrims. See, what is that book? I've got it behind me here. Killing the Planet. So, and I don't really. It's Rodney Howard Brown, and I take him with a grain of salt. But I heard that his co-author on a radio show, and it sounded like an interesting book. It really is an interesting book. But I thought, I kept thinking I'm going to look into the Pilgrims one day because it only really dedicates like 4 or 5 pages to it. So I finally got around to it, and I realized that there were three different people that have really done a lot of investigating into the Pilgrims. And it's Joel van der Regen, which I think he's Swiss. I could be wrong. It's also,
You talk about from ISGP studies.
yes,
He does a
absolutely.
lot of good work. Joel does. I definitely recommend people check out his website. A lot of good information.
Yeah, I agree.
Lost
I
Circle. He covers
agree.
Lost Circle a lot, which me and Recluse have talked about extensively. Of being kind of like the rights version of the Bilderberg Group. That very few people we know a lot less about Lars Circle than we even know about the Council for National Policy, or even that we really know. I guess. Well, I mean, she probably the Pilgrim Society could be similar to La Circle, and it's being mysterious, but.
Right. Yeah, that's true. And yeah, he does a great job. And there's another guy out of Texas. His name's Charles Savoy, and he's a silver speculator, a metals speculator, but mostly deals in silver. And so I guess he took an interest in that as a young boy, and it somehow led him to the Pilgrims because he traces it back to the Brits basically taking the ability to own silver away before the ability to own gold was taken away. So that led him to just basically a lifelong passion for looking into the Pilgrim Society, and he's written a lot of good stuff too. I think him and Van der Regen have actually worked together, and they both have a lot of tons of information. And then there's this guy, Michael McKibben, who's more recent. And I think he's kind of capitalized on those two guys and then also found out more stuff on his own. So but it's just like once I started looking into it, really didn't even expect to find much. I just kept little by little finding more and more connections, and they've been their members have been connected to a lot of important events throughout history. So, and if someone doesn't know about the Pilgrims, which most people don't because they've been so secretive, they claim to have started in 1902, and they say that they were just put together to foster the relationship between the Brits and the United States. And so they formed that branch in Britain, of course. And then the next year, they formed the American branch of the Pilgrims in New York City. And it's pretty interesting how the British one got things going. They kind of pitched it to a lot of the press, and they told them, hey, if you join this society, it'll help you to get access to the royal families, because I guess that was a big deal then and probably is now for Americans who are over there with the
Yes.
press. So that they were like all in immediately. In fact, one of the AP editors was one of the guys who actually pitched the idea to start the Pilgrim Society. So you had a lot of members at first from the press that joined, and then of course the bankers started joining, and the heads of different industries started joining. So it really became kind of a big deal. Of course, they claim that they only are a dinner club, that they just spend these thousands and thousands of dollars on these dinners to just foster good relations. But
Counts for national policy, not to interrupt you, odd man, but that's the same
no,
exact
no,
thing when Louis Woody Jenkins was asked about the CEP. Oh, it's just networking, just a bunch of conservatives networking, But at the same time, he also said that it was going to rival this Council on Foreign Relations in power, decades later, which it does. So it's
yeah,
kind of like it depends on who asks, right? If you're bragging, you're going to be like, we're super powerful and we're going to rival these other organizations. But if you want to keep it hush hush, you're like, oh, we just get together and just eat a lot of fancy food and just network and shoot the crap,
exactly. Yeah, yeah. And you can see through that it's basically a way to network, of course, but network for economic reasons. And they've built this, I call it the spider with 1,000 legs. They've out of the Pilgrims and the Rhodes roundtables with the Society of the Elect and all the rest. Of course, later on, of course, they formed the CFR and the Royal Institute of International Affairs, or Chatham House. But they've put those councils of foreign relations and the Royal Institutes in all kinds of places. They're all over the map in other countries. I think that's one thing that I notice a lot of people in our circle, they don't really talk about. They'll mention the CFR, but they really don't get past the CFR and the Royal Institute of International Affairs past the United States and England. But that's kind of going down another rabbit hole, but it'll connect later. Yeah, it's amazing that they've been able to pass this off. And the guy who is credited as the founder of the Pilgrims from the UK, his name is Harry Brisson, and that's with two T's. And he actually wrote a hard to find book I think it was in 1945, if I'm not mistaken, but I could be wrong about that date. And it is about the Pilgrims. It's called The Pilgrims and Pioneers. And if you search hard enough, you can find it online. Probably archive.org has it on there. But he gives away a lot of their details. It's like he kind of whitewashes their history, but he also gives enough information with the connections to realize that it's all about these bankers and these heads of industry. And, they really have created a multinational cabal, even though the Brits seem to be in charge of it. And of course, America is secondary. And it kind of figures in with the Rhodes Scholarships, because I was reading the Cecil Rhodes, the last will and testament of Cecil Rhodes. And that was, he had I think 6 wills that he had started when he was in college, the first will. It was unbelievable. I guess because he thought he wasn't going to live very long, and he actually didn't. But his best friend, W.T. Stead, was a big newspaper editor and columnist in the UK, and so he wrote that book, The Last Will and Testament, for Cecil. And so he mentions in there, Rhodes' plans in his own words from the papers that he had actually, the letters he had written to him, how he's going to form these secret societies and base them on the Jesuits as far as the way they network and the way they handle their business.
Wow.
And
Okay. I
so
wonder if there was a hidden group of assassins like Opus Dei in there as well. If we're talking about.
That's a good question. That's a really good question. He was, a lot of these pilgrims were also Freemasons. They came out of the lodge in Oxford. It was called the Apollo Lodge, and Cecil Rhodes
okay.
was. Yeah, and Cecil Rhodes was also one of those. But Cecil kind of thought that, like, he liked some of the things about Freemasonry, but he thought the dressing up and all that stuff was ridiculous. But he said, we can start this secular church and base it off the Jesuits and a little bit off the Freemasons, and start this society to take back the world for England. And so the Pilgrims were all a part of that. It was kind of a tribute to Cecil, because the year he died, they started the Pilgrims. And W.T. Stead, the guy that wrote basically his memoir, also wrote something called Government by Journalism. And he was a big journalist. So he wrote this 27-page paper, I believe, to basically explain how you could take over governments through journalism. And so I think that may have happened in a roundabout way, because a lot of these, the Pilgrims were journalists and newspaper owners and editors. I think his name was, Otto S. Ox, I believe was his name. And he was the owner of New York Times, and he was one of the founders of the Pilgrim Society. Other guys who started off in the beginning was, there were three Rothschilds. There was Lord Nathan Rothschild, who I believe was the president of the Bank of England. You had Lord Perbrite, he had married into the Rothschild family, and his wife, who was a Rothschild, I believe her name was Hannah, she passed away suddenly. She had some illness, or he killed her. I don't know. Who knows? But he inherited all that Rothschild money. And so there is actually a Perbrite Institute now, kind of relates back to today, they actually dedicated the name, of course, to him, and they make vaccines. They test them on animals. And of course, Bill Gates is invested in the Perbrite Institute.
Of course.
It just goes on and on. You had another Rothschilds, Henry D. Worms was his surname, but he was a Rothschild. You had Lord Alfred Milner, who was basically the guy who handled Cecil Rhodes' fortune and kind of helped create the Rhodes Scholarships and the CFR and the Royal Institute and all that. Lord Rosebery, all these lords, basically, you had, and they had a good thing going, man, because by using their lordship name, they didn't have to use their real name. So a lot of people didn't realize that those two guys were Rothschilds. Lord Nathan Rothschild still used his surname, but the other two didn't. And of course, you had John Jacob Astor, Lord Balfour of the Balfour Declaration, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. I believe he wrote Sherlock Holmes.
Yes, he did. You're making me sad, on man. Stop now, stop. I like my Sherlock Holmes novels.
I know. I was surprised to see that name. It's kind of out of the blue there. We got Henry Kerr, H.G. Wells, the famous Fabian socialist.
H.G. Wells makes sense 100%.
Oh yeah, definitely. And of course, not Woodrow Wilson, excuse me, Winston Churchill. Of course, that was a little bit later on after their founding, but he was a big member. And of course, he was one who kind of helped drag us into wars, So, and And a lot of people don't realize that he was a big New World Order guy. He helped create the European Union and wanted to establish a New World Order. So I think I used to kind of look up to him. He's a clever rascal, an interesting character from history, but his history has been a bit whitewashed. And as far as the U.S. Pilgrim Society, in the beginning, you had some really big hitters. Of course, I mentioned Adolph S. Ox of the New York Times. You had J.P. Morgan, who was a vice president of the Pilgrims in 2010. And I was thinking, because I've got this book, it's called, and it's a autobiography, or it's a biography of the Pilgrims by a pilgrim, and it's called The Pilgrims of the United States, A Centennial History. Came out in 2003. And they also have the Pilgrims of Great Britain that came out the year before, which I can't find that one. That one, if you find it at all, it's like usually 150, $200. I got this one for 20. I don't know why the British one's so expensive, but it's like kind of like maybe they don't want people finding out things. But you had, and I was thinking, J.P. Morgan was a vice president of the Pilgrims Society, which is a dinner society. Why would one of the richest men in the world even bother with something like that? That was just kind of my thoughts. John D. Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, Jacob Schiff of Federal Reserve fame, President Grover Cleveland, President Howard Taft, Mark Twain, the great satirist, Thomas Lamont, Percy and William Rockefeller, Ogden Mills Reed, I believe he was another newspaper man, if I remember correctly, Otto Kahn, Andrew Mellon, W.B. Whitney, Cornelius Vanderbilt, Vincent Astor, Mortimer Schiff, another Schiff. You had Nelson Aldrich, which was, I believe, the grandfather of the Rockefeller brothers. He came up with the Aldrich Plan before it was called the Federal Reserve. It was called the Aldrich Plan. And you had Paul Warburg of Federal Reserve fame. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, he helped to fund Trotsky and Lenin, I believe. You had Lord Norcliffe, who owned the London Times. And you had Elihu, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this correctly, or Elihu Root. He was a Secretary of War in the U.S., but he was also the first president of the Carnegie Endowment. So that was just your earlier members. And obviously you had some really, it was basically the who's who of the U.S. and Britain.
Huh. So on the ISGP Studies website, there was a list of people who were in the Pilgrim Society of the leaked, people that we know whom are in it, and people who were in other the World Order think tanks. So you had 235 members of the Council on Foreign Relations were also members of the Pilgrim Society. That's a lot. So that means that about 18% of the U.S. Pilgrims are CFR members. 47 were CFR executives. 180 had Rockefeller interests. 105 had Morgan interests. 84 had United Nations posts like ambassadors or other representatives. 53 were connected to the Carnegie Network. 44 were connected to the Ditchley Foundation. 33 were connected to the Federal Reserve, either having senior officers or some sort of post in the United States Federal Reserve. 27 were in the Trilateral Commission. 26 were in the Bilderberg Group. So yeah, that's a pretty big amount. Now, Joel mentioned that he didn't really look to see, count all the pilgrims in the Trilateral Commission or Bilderberg Group. I'm pretty sure people could find more. Mm-hmm. But this seems to be a very powerful group. I saw that Henry Kissinger was a member too as well.
Yes.
And so was what was the guy's name? Hold on. Kissinger and I'm trying to remember. There's another really big heavy hitter on there.
Oh, Zbigniew Brzezinski.
Yes, Zbigniew Brzezinski. There you go. Yes.
It says in this book, which like I said, was written by them, and if anybody wants to get it, the author is Anne Pimlott Baker, and she's a Pilgrims Society member and a historian. But she says in there that not only was Kissinger a member, but he was their president for a time. And she doesn't actually give the span of the time he was president. And she does do that with some people, so I don't know why she didn't. But the very last page in there is Kissinger with Henry Luce, who started Time magazine. And it also says that Luce, well, it says in this book, as of the printing, which was 2003, that Luce was the president.
Yes. That's it. Okay. Yeah. Do you, so just to circle back,
Yeah.
can you tell us a little bit of, I'm pretty sure most people know who he is, but can you tell us a little bit about Cecil Rhodes, if you don't mind?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'd be happy to. Well, Cecil Rhodes, obviously he was from England, and he is famous for the Rhodes Scholarships, but it's pretty interesting how he kind of came to be. He was actually funded. He was sent to Rhodesia, or what became of Rhodesia. I think it's called Zimbabwe now, but it was in South Africa. And he was sent there to mine the diamonds and the gold. And he was actually funded by the East India Company, which was owned partially by the English government. And the East India Company, if anyone doesn't remember, are famous for getting thousands of Indians and Chinese hooked on opium. That was how they made their money. So they sent him over there, as well as the Rothschilds. They helped fund him as well. But what I didn't realize was Cecil Rhodes was on the royals, the king at the time. I guess that was King Edward. He was on his Privy Council, and the Privy Council is a very, very exclusive council who's directly related to the Pilgrims, and they were basically like the elite of the elite, just under the royal family. So he was sent over there to mine their gold and diamonds, and he made an absolute fortune. And that's the reason that there's a lot of people over there in South Africa who speak English, because to this day, when he went over there, people started hearing that, hey, this guy's making a fortune in diamonds and gold. So people started flocking over there to try to get in on the gold rush and the diamond rush. So a lot of Brits and even some Americans went over there. And eventually they named the place after him. He took over a large part of Africa, or North Africa, or South Africa, excuse me, I'm sorry. He had intentions of taking over North Africa, but he didn't quite get there. But he decided that he was going to form these secret societies. And the really interesting thing is, I think I mentioned it briefly earlier, but if you read his last will and testament that W.T. Stead wrote about him, Rhodes was planning this while he was at Oxford University when he was either 26 or 27 years old. He started planning to create this secret society to take over the world for the Brits. And, it almost sounds like a movie, like something someone would write, because when I was 27, I wasn't thinking of anything similar to that whatsoever. It was just amazing that he had that foresight, but he began to work on it after he got out of college. And when he went over to Rhodesia, a couple of years in, he started putting it together. So it was all the upper crust of England, his friends from England, and the bank, Nathan Rothschild, the head of the Bank of England, of course, was one of the first ones that he put into what he called the Society of the Elect. And he talked about in his writings and in his wills about how to create these secret societies, would have one goal, and that goal would be to try and take over the world for England. And of course, he claimed he had good intentions, because he said this is the finest race that's ever been, and he wanted to take back America. And the interesting thing is, he didn't hate America. He actually liked our Constitution, according to W.T. Stead. And he liked things about America, but he resented the fact that we had taken our independence from the king and the queen. So he thought that, they needed to take over the Brits. And he said that's the only way we could create world peace. And of course, that's always the excuse for globalism. We're going to create world peace. So out of his wills came, of course, the Pilgrims Society, the Society of the Elect, and then a little bit later in 1920, they created, after Rhodes died, they created the Royal Institute of International Affairs, or Chatham House, and that is in England, and that is the CFR over there. It was the year before CFR was created here in the United States. And they do all the same things, and it's all about networking for the central bankers and the heads of high finance. And then the next year they created the CFR. And just real quick, I'll mention that pretty interesting. The CFR is celebrating their 100 years in 2021. And wouldn't that be an awesome thing to actually accomplish world government for Cecil Rhodes in 2021 to celebrate their centennial? Even though I don't think they'll quite do it, I mean, I think that might have a little bit to do with the push. And of course, there's Agenda 21 as well. But, that's kind of all goes together, I think.
So, what were some of the things that the Pilgrim Society that you knew, of that they were involved in, or at least some of the players in of themselves were involved in?
Yeah. Well, you had people like King Edward, Winthrop Aldridge, Chase National Bank. A lot of these guys, these high finance guys, they helped to fund different sides of wars. So that's one thing. The Pilgrim Society members, many of them have their footprint or their fingerprints on a lot of the wars that have been fought needlessly throughout the modern history. You had John Foster Dulles and Allen Dulles, of the CIA and CFR. These guys they were basically smuggling or helping the Nazis get down to South America. So that's one thing. You had, and as far as like a lot of these guys were connected to the media, and that's one of the main things that I wanted to just kind of like go over. Is I heard Michael McKibben say this, and I thought it was silly at first, and then I started listening and looking farther into it. He said, look, if you follow the documents, it's not that the MI5 and MI6 infiltrated, and later the CIA infiltrated the press. The press created MI5, MI6, and later on the OSS and the CIA. And it really does seem like that, because when you start to follow the names, a lot of these newspaper guys were involved in the founding of those different institutions. So I think that's very interesting, because Cecil Rhodes had a famous, in that book about his life, he had a famous quote in there about taking over the media. Well, he didn't call it media. He said the press. He said, because the press controls the minds of the people. So they really knew what was going on way before, the term fake news came about. They were planning these kind of things. And I think that they've kind of molded and shaped our world. And I think that it's probably a lot of this infiltration in the press, or possibly it's always been that way since that time, that the press has been very, very slanted and they had, they were out to do certain things. It wasn't like an unbiased press, like people say, we got to go back to the times of, when the media was fair and we had Walter Cronkite and we could trust people. Of course, Cronkite was a world federalist and wanted to create the global government. But I think it goes back a lot further than that. Zbigniew Brzezinski, as we mentioned earlier, was a big Pilgrim Society member. But, he's absolutely responsible for a lot of the foreign policies regarding the Middle East. You know, he was. It was when he was working with Carter that they decided to start funding these jihadis. They started funding the Mujahideen. I think it was called Operation Cyclone, and those guys turned into. They've eventually turned into Al Qaeda, and of course, we know how all that turned out. So you got guys like Kissinger and I believe Averell Harriman and a few of these other guys who were really instrumental in pushing the Vietnam War. And the Vietnam War was an interesting one because they never really planned for us to even win it. And it was the first one that I think they were really pushing the military industrial complex and seeing what they could do and how much they could get out of it. And so I think that you've got guys like that. But you've even go back farther than that. You've got George Marshall of the Marshall Plan. And if you really start to look into the documents, they were actually planning to kind of put together a Marshall Plan a couple of years before they did it. And it ended up being a way that they could funnel a lot of money. And it was basically virtually untraceable. So I think they were pushing for World War II, long before, maybe before it even started. I think that that's, if you really follow the trail, I think that that's fairly provable. But things like that, that they've really been instrumental in over the modern part of history.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. No one talks about him anymore, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and you've got another guy, Lord Grey. He was the president of the League of Nations. And of course, we know they were trying to push that global governance under the League of Nations. And, they really thought that they were going to get it done then. And I mentioned Henry Luce. He was, of course, he created Time Magazine, but he also was the head of Fortune Magazine at one time. And he was the head of Time Warner at one time. So we had a guy named Chauncey M. Depew, who was president of the New York Central Railroad, but he was on the board of a dozen other railroads. And he gave the address at the Statue of Liberty opening. So these guys they really are part of our history, and the history, unfortunately, has been kind of swept under the rug of obscurity because I guess they probably didn't want certain things to get out, or they didn't want us to know that, hey, there's actually a group of these guys who are kind of working towards similar goals.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess you're right. So has there been any recent leaks about the Pilgrim Society that you're aware of?
Well, that's interesting. So this book, surprisingly enough, it tells you all I suppose it's all the members over time up until 2003. And there are, I think McKibben has been able to find a few things as far as financial records go that do link certain people to the Pilgrim Society after that, like Paul Volcker of Federal Reserve. Let's see, excuse me. There's another guy from Canada. Let me see if I can find his name. I'm not seeing it here, but he's a big media. Oh, Conrad Black, media figure.
Which Conrad Black was involved with Epstein with Trump.
Mm-hmm.
And didn't Trump pardon Conrad Black?
Oh, I don't know. That's a good question. That would be very interesting. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I know there's admirals. Another thing that the Pilgrims did was they decided after about 10 years or so that the English branch would have a big dinner every time there was a new U.S. ambassador from England or vice versa. And they would have him do his first speaking engagement at that big gala. And so America would do the same thing. And so there's something to do with those ambassadors. And I don't know, I guess if you're an ambassador to America from England or vice versa, and you're part of the Pilgrim Society, well, they want to foster that relationship or merge the two countries. I'll tell you something else that I think that your listeners would find
Yeah.
interesting.
I didn't want to interrupt you. I just want to say yes. Trump did pardon Conrad Black, and Conrad
Wow.
Black supported Trump's reelection. Of course, there was, Conrad Black was friendly with both Epstein and Trump, and they met in his house in the early 2000s with Ghislaine Maxwell. And Conrad Black, who was the reporter? Who was the reporter on Epstein, where she was her husband was related to Conrad Black?
That sounds familiar.
Hold on, let me see. Let's see if I can come up with anything. Vicky Ward. So Vicky
Okay.
Ward, Conrad Black. She said Conrad Black was my ex-husband's former boss, but then I think it came out that it was her ex-husband's. I want to say Conrad Black was uncle, I think, but I could be wrong about that. But there's pictures of Vicky Ward even after Epstein. It was well known that that he was a pedophile. Vicky Ward was still seen at parties with Ghislaine Maxwell. So
Wow. What a tangled web we weave, right?
very much so. Continue.
No. I was just going to say something that your viewers might find interesting. A friend of mine sent this to me, so thanks to Julian. But the congressional record of 1940, the proceedings and debates of the 76th Congress, third session. And so I won't read much of it, but I'll just tell you it's all about merging the two governments, of course, the English government and the United States government. And it's called Steps Towards British Union, a World State and International Strife. And it is by a congressman by the name of Han J. Thorkelson of Montana. So if anybody wants to check that out, it's pretty interesting. It's 38 pages. It's a little bit of legalese and stuff like that, but they're basically just making the case that we need to merge the two governments like an EU type thing. So if anybody wants that, I'll be happy to send it to them. But, they really haven't given up that idea of merging the two. And of course we had the Trilateral Commission. That's one of their things, is merging several nations. And then you have the EU, of course, which it did merge. And then you almost had the North American Union under George W. Bush, which I always tell people to look up, because you can actually still get that. You may find it used. It may not be new anymore, but on Thrift Books has it. And it's the CFR put together a plan for a North American community. They call it community, but it's a North American Union. I think it was 2008, and none other than Heidi Cruz helped draft it, Ted Cruz's wife. I suppose she was a CFR member if she was doing that. Of course, the guy who ran as Libertarian VP, I think 4 or 5 years ago, what was his name?
Oh, you talk about Bill Weld, William Weld, who
Bill-
was a part of what's the book with Danny Castellero, The Octopus? He was a part of the transfer of the Promise software, then Slaw, with Monsieur Gobinafor and Adnan Khashoggi.
Wow. Yeah, that's insane. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I wouldn't doubt. I mean, I have a feeling that he's a spook, to be honest with you, Weld, or at least he's connected to intelligence and, of course, the CFR too. So, wow, that's crazy, man. Yeah, they want to. I think they wanted to create these smaller unions, so eventually, when the time come, like now, they could try to push those smaller unions into one bigger union, just one big union, and it would be easier than trying to bring in all these, independent nations. So, and America's kind of pushed that off for a long time, but it seems like they're going to do it, even if they don't call it that. They're going to do it anyway with the way our government is merging with private sector. It's crazy, public-private partnerships and all that. And they when they first had these meetings in the United States in the New York branch, they had them at the original Waldorf Astoria, and I believe that the Astors are the ones that built that, if I'm not mistaken.
And they were a
And then
big they're a big part of the Pilgrims Society, aren't they? The Astor family.
oh yeah, absolutely, yeah. And apparently, I think it was John Jay who did kind of have a problem with the Federal Reserve. He didn't want it. He said it wouldn't. I don't know why. Maybe he just happened to think, well, maybe he maybe he decided he did have some morals for a little bit or something. But yeah, he pushed against it, and of course, he went down with the Titanic. So, but yeah, he was definitely a part of the Pilgrim Society. Several Astors were. And they actually replaced the old Waldorf Astoria with the Empire State Building, which was kind of, I don't know, kind of interesting, just historically speaking. But there was something in 1909 called the Imperial Press Conference. And oddly enough, it was put together by the man who founded the Pilgrims, Harry Brisson. And I just thought it was kind of interesting because Brisson, he helped found the Imperial Press, and it's had a huge influence in England, of course, and probably even America. And so he had there was a famous quote from 1925 it was a newspaper called the Fourth Estate, and it was by a man named Viscount Burnham, and he was the vice president of the International Press Conference, and his family owned the Daily Telegraph. And he was complaining, he was like speaking before the press conference, and he said, the present difficulties are plaguing the world with chaos and anarchy. These difficulties must be settled by an overwhelming public opinion. The newspapers will create and guide this majestic force and occupy one great editorial room with adjoining desks by reason of present marvelous methods of communication. We must create public opinion, acting and reacting, without regard to international boundaries. And so he went on to say basically that, they needed to control the opinion of the public for its own good, of course. So I think that at least the press over there, I think, have been basically state-run press for a very long time, and I think ours has too for quite a while. Or maybe not even state. I think they're kind of a mishmash between government and state, government and large corporations. So I call it GovCorp. But and I'm just to be honest, just so your viewers know, I'm a capitalist. I mean, I really am, but I'm a true free market capitalist. Like, no bailing people out. You have a business and it's trial and error. If you fail, you fail. So I don't think the government should be.
I'm a fair market capitalist. There's a difference, right? So like,
Mhm.
I believe that the way the free market is now, it's not quote unquote free. They allow corporations to pretty much snuff out any competition at this point. Now, if we had a true, free capitalist society, or at least a true fair market capitalist society, I don't think that companies should get too large. I don't think you should have mega corporations and conglomerates like we do now. And I think you'd agree with me on that. That it would be fine. But the problem is, it is so messed up right now. I don't even know if it can ever be fixed.
Oh yeah, I feel the same way, and I kind of like the debate between how it is. It's like if you're a hardcore Democrat, it's always the private sector's fault, and if you're a hardcore Republican, it's always the government's fault. But I kind of look at it as, at least now, like you're saying, it's how do you separate the two? You can't, because they're in bed together at the highest, the upper echelons. They're in bed together, and the corporations write the freaking legislation, and it's like, and I know there's problems with Rand Paul, but like Rand Paul and even some Democrats have tried to put forth legislation that would make our representatives read read the bills before they vote on them, and our representatives won't even pass that legislation. So it's like it's a joke, at this point. It's like they just show up and and they pretend like they're representing us, and we, most people kind of still believe that's the case, but oh man, I got bad news for them. It's not.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. So I I don't know. I wonder. I I wonder why certain groups like the Council for National Policy or Law Circle or the Pilgrims Society are kind of brushed off to the side and no one really discusses them. Is it because they really are, the elite groups and they want to keep those more secretive? And many people, there's someone in the chat, I'm sorry whoever said this, and I can't give you credit for it. I think it was Josh Bear. He said, no, few people ever talk about Russia or talk about the Anglo-American establishment anymore.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of
That's
truth.
true.
There's a lot of truth to that. No one really, talks about the Anglo-American establishment. I mean, there are more people talking about Russia, but most people don't talk about the Anglo-American establishment. They just discuss Israel, Swiss, the Vatican. I said the city of London, but only in relation to the Zionists.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one thing I've tried to talk about in this channel is it's more than just that. Not to say that the Pilgrims Society didn't have their fair share of at least some Zionist ties with, like, the Rothschilds, for example. It does seem to be that they were, at least on appearance, to some degree against the Catholic Church, right? Or am I mistaken?
Well, with Van der Reygen, he kind of calls it the WASP, the what is it, the White Anglo Protestant. I forget the last, or it's WASP, White Anglo something Protestants. I forget now, but anyway, excuse me. But I feel like a lot of these guys are Catholic, from what I've read. Now there are a few. There's one or two Protestant ministers who were in the Pilgrim Society early on, and one was a president. I forget his name now, but it seems like some of these guys, or the majority of these guys, were Catholic. So I think that's kind of interesting as well. And like to kind of bring it into more modern terms with the Pilgrims, you have institutions or companies, excuse me, like Serco. And Serco is a UK-based company with ties to the Pilgrims, and they are a huge company. They're working with COVID-19 with the test and trace. They are a huge company as far as arms dealership goes. They have lots of contracts, high contracts. I mean, like big time contracts with the United States, major money there. There's another one that's just come to my attention today, and I've got to do more research. I don't want to, I can't really say too much about it, but it's called Kinetic, and it's QINETIQ. And that is also a UK company that has a lot of big contracts with the United States military and such. So I think even like I was looking up these UK, and I can't tie this completely to the Pilgrims, but as far as the UK Anglo-American establishment goes, the founder of AstraZeneca was a lady by the name of Baroness Rona, get that, Rona, A. Fairhead. She was on the Privy Council of the Queen's Privy Council, and she was a director at Oracle. I don't know if she still is. She was also the head of the Financial Times from 2006 to 2013. So I don't think a lot of people know about these British-based companies that have these huge contracts with the United States. And there's no way that we would know, because it's not like our press would tell us these things. And if they did, it would just be something passing quickly. So I think that these groups like the Perbrite Institute, Serco, Kinetic, and different ones, I think that we all need to start looking more into maybe some of those companies that work hand in hand with our government that are from the UK, and kind of see if we can find out what their ties are. Because I think that, like you said, a lot of people are looking in other directions, and that's cool too. But I think we need to look in every direction to kind of see where the truth is.
I 100% agree with you on that. Now, of course, Nadim Zawawi was appointed minister in charge of the COVID-19 vaccine rollout in the United Kingdom, and he was also a major member in Law Circle. So these people, they're running all of this.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't realize that, because they're so focused on, Council on Foreign Relations and the Bilderberg Group. Not to say that the top elite echelon of those groups aren't part of the world order at all. They definitely are. But the thing is people forget that there's these other groups. It's kind of like a shell game, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Where they're like, oh, look over here, like sleight of hand. It's like, they leak this. You can go Google the Council on Foreign Relations list now, membership list. Now, whether or not they're true or not, we really don't know. But at least they put them out. Or
Right.
how many people they find out where the Bilderberg Group meetings are, and then they go stand outside and they film, and let's get a list to see of who's coming in and out of the Bilderberg Group.
Right.
So it's just interesting that everybody puts all of their focus on that, but they don't pay attention to the Pilgrims Society. They don't pay attention to Law Circle. They don't pay attention to the Council for National Policy, and and at least some people have paid attention to the Atlantic Council, which seems to be their new Bilderberg in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And there'll probably be secret societies, brother, that you and I may never even hear of.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, man. Yeah, I got this book, and he's a very right-wing guy, but the book is pretty fantastic. It's called I Dare Call It Treason by Servando Gonzalez. And it's kind of like, if you want to know the more modern CFR history, and he's a really big I think he's Cuban, so he really covers the Cuban history with the CFR and the CIA and stuff like that. But it's cool because in the back of the book, he talks about all those interlocked institutions around the world that are connected to the Rhodes Roundtables, the CFR and the Royal Institute.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just go through just a few, so your viewers can kind of get an idea of, because we only heard the CFR here, and I never knew any of these other ones existed. You've got the Mexico Council on Foreign Relations, the Israel Council, the European Council. You've got the Pacific Council on International Policy, the Danish Institute of International Affairs, National Democratic Institute for International Affairs. These are all linked. The Netherlands Institute of International Relations, French Institute of International Relations, Institute of International Affairs in Rome. You've got, of course, the Atlantic Institute for International Affairs. It's in Paris. You've got the Finnish Institute of International Affairs, the Japanese Institute, Norwegian, the Prague Institute, the German Council on Foreign Relations, Chinese Institute of Foreign Affairs, Royal Institute of International Affairs, Belgium. This one surprised me. The Moscow State Institute of International Relations. I was really surprised that Mother Russia has one of their CFR linked groups. You got, yeah. The Institute of Jewish Affairs, now called the Jewish Policy Center, the Swedish Institute of International Affairs, South African Institute, Australian Institute, Canadian Institute, and then you have the Institute for Pacific Relations, which actually shut down in '61, but it was interlocked and had a lot to do with foreign policy. And then I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but you have the Chicago Council on Foreign Relations, which is huge. But beyond those, you've got the World Affairs Council, which has multiple different institutes in different areas. Then you've got these city councils on foreign relations. And I believe that Mike Pompeo is on the board membership of the City Council on Foreign Relations in Wichita. So it's just unbelievable, man. That it's like it's kind of scary in a way when you think about it, because they basically are covering the entire globe, and it's no wonder that these things like COVID and different things like that, they can, if these other institutes have control over the press, like the CFR and these other globalists have over our press, then it's no wonder the whole world is it's just in a bad situation, because you could spread propaganda so easily. All these different ones can get together and just kind of send out the talking points to the whole freaking world, and they'll go out like crazy, and within a few hours everybody across the whole freaking globe thinks the same thing's going on. It's really scary.
No, you're right. Just a gal asked in the chat, what was the name of the book about conspiracy?
The it's called I Dare Call It Treason by Servando Gonzalez.
Okay, thank you. Okay,
You're very welcome, man. And he's got another book I've got on Kindle. It's something about I think it's called Psychological Warfare. Maybe it's a good one too, man, because he really gets into the whole kind of propaganda side of things like this. But yeah, it's crazy, man, because it's just such a wide ranging. Like I said, the spider with 1,000 legs, it just covers the globe. And I don't know, you kind of feel, in a way, when you think about it like that, it kind of feels helpless. Like, what can I do to make a difference? But at least if you can kind of help people to understand what's going on, that at least people will know what to expect maybe in the future.
Yeah, I guess a tidbit that because you mentioned Pompeo, who I think was one of the biggest power elites and rising stars that the Council for National Policy has. I don't think Pompeo's just some dude. I think he's on the level of like a John Kenneth Blackwell. He's a kingmaker. He's not a Rothschild, obviously, but he's got some pull. Now, the person that was above him, who I do think has a little bit more pull, was Council for National Policy member Marianne Glendon, who was United States ambassador to the Holy See under the George W. Bush administration. And Glendon, at one time, when the Boston Globe was good, when it was won the Pulitzer Prize for its coverage of sexual abuse by Catholic priests, Glendon told a conference of Catholics that if fairness and accuracy have anything to do with it, awarding the Pulitzer Prize to the Boston Globe would be like giving the Nobel Peace Prize to Osama bin Laden.
Wow. That is wild, man.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. Someone needs to dig on Marianne Glendon. There's just so many people you got to dig into. You just don't get the time,
Absolutely. Yeah.
But so, I guess in closing, do you think that there'll be any more information leaked about the Pilgrims Society? And is there, you think there's any more? There's probably more information that could be uncovered, right? But there's only so much with these secretive groups. Like La Circle, we have that excellent book, Rogue Agents by David Teacher, but there hasn't been any leaked membership lists. We got a few leaks here and there in newspapers and stuff like that. That's how we know that Nadim Zawawi was part of La Circle recently. But what about the Pilgrim Society? I mean, and also, where would you rank them in the world order as far compared to other societies?
Yeah. So the first question, I can't say. I kind of wonder if maybe they have called it a day and said we've accomplished what we wanted to, and they can take care of the rest with the CFRs and Bilderbergs and all that. But then again, they still have the website up, which tells you nothing. I believe it's Pilgrims Society of Great Britain.org. And if you go on there, I noticed something today. If you go on where it says, I can't remember if it says speeches or it's something like that. It's got 3 pictures. And one of the pictures, I believe, is one of their presidents. And he's sticking his hand halfway inside his jacket doing the hidden hand sign.
Hidden hander.
Yeah, and I'm like, dude, that is not a coincidence. He is doing that on purpose. I mean, you wouldn't make your only picture a hidden hand sign, So I don't know. And I guess if anyone will find out, it'll be McKibben, or I don't know if Vanderhagen is still doing it. I hope he is. But I hope that we find out more if they're still around, because the power players that have been in there, it's just unbelievable. And, real quick, with Henry Kissinger, he's been a counsel and foreign relations director. He's been, I believe he was a director of a trilateral commission. Of course, he's always at Bilderberg. And he is, I believe, a director of the Atlantic Council, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe it's Aspen Institute.
He is on the board of the Atlantic Council's International Affairs. He's a board member, yes.
Okay. Yeah, and he's definitely a member of the Aspen Institute board, and also a Pilgrim, if I didn't mention at one time, a Pilgrim president. So it's like, who's going to take his place? He can't do it much longer. There's no way. But that guy, the only person that even comes close, I think, would have been Brzezinski, and, he passed away. So this guy is kind of been the poster boy for the global world order for his whole life. It's like he was just put in there to be that. And so I wonder who's going to kind of fill that void when he dies. But I'm sorry, what was your second question, my friend?
Where would you rank them in part of the world order? Where would you put them equivalent to, if you could think of maybe? I know we're spitballing, speculating. I'll tell where I think they are, but where would you put them at?
Well, I would have to put them with kind of a Bilderberg, at least is up there with Bilderberg, just because of the people who've been involved in the group. And there could be, I think, I believe Carol Quigley, and I know Anthony C. Sutton said there is a circle inside the CFR and the Chatham House. So I think that there may be a circle within the Pilgrim Society. I know they're connected to like the bar association with the with the lawyers. They're connected to that.
Yes.
There's so many different ways we could go with this, but so I said, at least as high up as the Bilderbergs.
Well, I mean, Winston Churchill was a member. There are connections to the John Birch Society and the Council for National Policy directly to, and Les Turkel, directly to the Pilgrim Society. You had Lieutenant General Daniel Graham, who was part of High Frontier, which was Star Wars, who was also working directly with the known pedophile and part of the Franklin scandal nexus, Craig J. Spence. And also Lieutenant General Daniel Graham was giving speeches to Elizabeth Clare Prophet in the Church of Universal and Triumphant about the High Frontier program and how it was going to save members of our church in America from the godless USSR commies. So, wow. I mean, you also had, who was the, Casey. William Casey was a member of the Pilgrim Society, was he not?
I believe he was.
So, yeah, you have Les Turkel Casey there. And I think I'm going to have you back on, and maybe we'll do a part 2 in the next few months. And by then, I will track down the connections between Les Turkel and Council for National Policy and John Birch Society the best that I can. And we
Sounds great.
Maybe you could present some new information that maybe you could try to dig up if you want to continue researching them. I think it'd be fun. I mean, we don't even have to do a whole show on it. We can do a whole show just talking about whatever. And I actually want to have you back on before then, actually, Odd Man. But yeah, I think it would be fun to do so. Exposed Enemy, John Swin in the chat. Shout out to John. He mentioned the Newcomen Society. is linked closely with the Pilgrims Society.
Okay.
So that's
Great.
another lead. That's another way to track down.
Absolutely.
So,
let me mention one thing real quick too. I may get the name wrong. I wish I had the information in front of me. There is another, and I believe it's connected to the Pilgrim Society. It came out of the Rhodes Roundtable, and you never hear about it. It's sort of like the Rhodes Scholarships, but I believe it's called the Swartz or the Swartzman Scholarships, and that's directly related to the Pilgrim Society. And I've got to do more research about it, but people, your viewers can definitely check that out, and they can probably find out more than I can. So.
And one last thing I want to mention too, man, while you're talking about secret societies within secret societies, there was a elite secret society within the Council for National Policy known as the Arlington Group that supposedly disbanded. And one of the major members of the Arlington Group that no one ever talks about was the mentor of the PayPal Mafia, who both Peter Thiel and Elon Musk look up greatly to, and that is the futurist Rod D. Martin. And I actually need to do a show on Rod D. Martin because it is fascinating with his connections to a lot of the modern day big tech that is being running by the Council for National Policy at this time, like PayPal, Tesla. So yeah, it's quite interesting to see those connections. So
Very much so. Yeah, it's when you start to follow those connections, you just never know where they're going to lead. Because it's almost like when you really start to think about money and power, left and right doesn't mean a thing. They don't care. So you might find somebody who you really think is hardcore right connected to somebody who's hardcore left, and it's just it's very interesting. It's you just never know.
Yeah, Oddman, do you want to tell everybody where they can find you, brother? I got the Oddcast up. I got links in the show notes to your Twitter, your Stitcher, and your Patreon. I definitely want to thank you for coming on, man. We're definitely it's going to be sooner rather than later. I'm probably going to have you on within another month or so. If we don't discuss the rest of the Pilgrim Society, it'll be about something else. But definitely want to thank you for coming on. And a lot of people enjoyed it, man. They really enjoyed you being with us and you discussing the little-known Pilgrim Society.
Thank you to everyone. I really appreciate it, man. Thanks for having me on. This has been a blast. Yeah, I'm going to continue looking into this. I got a lot of stuff to research about the Pilgrims, and I also have an Instagram that's doing pretty well. If people want to check it out, it is _the_oddman_out, and you can find my podcast. It gets updated the quickest on alternatecurrentradio.com. So if you want to check that out, and I'm also, if you go on alternatecurrentradio.com, I'm on a show called Boiler Room on Thursday nights. If you want to check that out with a pretty cool group of people. So thank you, John, for having me, man.
Anytime, brother. I'm glad that I was, you reached out to me and I was on the Oddcast. I want to promote you as much as I possibly can. You're a very strong brother in Christ, very strong in your faith, and it's good to have someone else representing this in the Truth or Industrial Complex. Even though we're not a part of the Truth Industrial Complex, but just being part of the Truth movement at this time makes you you have to fight against people in the Truth Industrial Complex, should I say, and all the bad disinformation that's out there that exists. So yeah, I definitely want to thank you for coming on.
Absolutely, man. Anytime you want to talk, I'm ready, man.
All right, everybody, that's it. Shout out to John Swin, Exposed Enemy. Can't wait for your documentary to come out. When it comes out, I'd love to be able to interview you, John. If that's okay with you, brother. You're doing excellent work. I will push that documentary to the moon the best that I can. But I want to thank to everybody who was here with me today. I want to thank Oddman too as well. Definitely go subscribe and follow him. Take care, everybody. God bless.